Right, okay, super low quality video work here. But this is the absolute mess that is testing out something that I should have done years ago. So, how to synchronize two copies of Ableton Live on two different computers, not using local area network, because I've never found a simple, effective, reliable way of doing that without using an external or a software clock. That usually ends up with some sort of an issue. Anyway, so cut a long story short, this setup is basically, and the problem, there's a piece of software called Backline, which is an application that will create a clock that you can use to synchronize two laptops together. It does work really well, but in order to change the tempo, you have to stop both instances of Live because they're both running as slaves. You have to then change the master clock, and then you have to restart them both, which isn't really practicable in the live environment. So, I don't know why this solution hasn't been put forward before. It probably has. People are probably using it. So what I'm using is my trusty Akai MPD32. Notice not plugged in via USB, so I'm not using it as a MIDI device or a MIDI controller per se inside Live. I'm using it as a standalone clock because it has tap tempo, and it also has an internal clock that I can set the BPM for, okay, and I can change that inside here, okay. That's great. That gives me the ability to change the tempo. So what's happening next is from the MIDI out from the MPD, I'm going into this MIDI splitter here that I happen to have kicking around from years ago. So all that's happening is the input is coming in here from the Akai MPD32, and then there are two throughs here. Okay, so through 1 is going into this MT4. Could be any MIDI input, doesn't matter what it is. This could be, I'm using this just because I don't have a second sound card for the second laptop, but this allows me to put MIDI in. So this is going to the MIDI in port here, okay. So, and then the other through, number 2 here, is going all over here, and into my TC electronic sound card. So the sound card is connected to the Mac here, the primary Mac, and the MT4 is connected via USB to the other Mac here. Okay, so basically that's just giving both the Macs a MIDI port, right? Then what I'm doing is the audio is coming out of the second Mac, if you like, but they're both slaves, but this is the second Mac, and this audio is going in to the sound card that's connected to the first Mac, basically just using it as a mixer, so I can mix the sounds together. Okay, now inside Live, what's happening here on this Mac, if we go into the preferences, basically I've just enabled I've enabled sync on input 1 on the eMagic MT4. So that's this business here, yeah. So input 1, sync is enabled. That will then display the EXT function, external clock function here in the top right. So I can then activate that, and that means that this this instance of Live is now synced to and locked to the external clock, whatever that is. In this case, it's the Akai MPD, and over here on the primary Mac I have exactly the same setup. What I've done is I've just enabled the synchronization for the MIDI port that's on the TC sound card over there. Okay, hope that's making sense so far. That will then also have the same effect of activating the possibility of locking to an external clock, which it is. So what happens now is that I cannot stop. Well, I can stop, but I can't play. I can't play anything in here because it's locked to an external clock. I can stop and rewind, but if I press play, it just goes green, nothing happens. Now what I've done is I've loaded in exactly the same stock Ableton clip in here as I have done in here, but in this instance of Live, because this is the sound card that everything's running through, I've got a second audio track with the audio in enabled from the first Mac. So the audio for both of these will be coming through this Mac and going out of the outputs into the speakers. Okay, so basically now what I can do is I can go to the Akai MPD and use these fabulous transport controls here and launch them both. Now what you'll hear is some sort of crazy phasing, right? Well, that's because it's playing exactly the same clip, and what I've done, actually I'm still mucking about with it, but I've actually put utility on there and inverted it. So I was trying to get it perfectly aligned, but obviously I can't quite do that because I can't perfectly balance the volumes here, and also one of the left or right isn't working on this cable, so I've only got a left signal in one, I've got a stereo in the other, so I'm not going to get a perfect phase cancellation. But even with the utility turned off, I'll disable that, I can hear that there's phasing going on, and that to me signifies that it's super close to being actually in time, like accurately, perfectly in time. And if I look at the BPM counter up here, I can see that we're locking at 100, and over here we're looking at 100, or just over 100. It's slightly different, but actually it's sounding tight in terms of it's sounding phased, so it's super tight. And what you can do then, I've actually been tweaking it. You go into the preferences on whichever Mac, whichever computer you want. You don't have to do this on both, but if you do it on one, if I delete the sync delay, okay. So one of the things is that just due to the nature of MIDI and the fact that each of these devices, so the MT4 and the TC, will have slightly different latencies. Also, there may be there's a very small amount of latency introduced by the fact that I'm using different length cables, MIDI cables. So there's all these tiny little bits of latency that are adding up. But I can go into the, I can open up here. Sorry about this video, it's going to be really annoyingly shaky for those of you who are desperate to get this to work. Okay, so I can open up this input and I can offset one of the clocks by however much I feel it needs to be in order to be tight. So if I launch this again, you'll just hear how when I bring this one clock back a little bit, you'll hear how they start to go more and more, the sound becomes more and more phased as it gets closer and closer to perfect sync. It's somewhere around here. I mean, basically you could muck about with this with some more accurate samples and more carefully planned levels, and you could probably get this pretty much bang on in sync. The bottom line is though that it's good, it's really good, it's tight, and more importantly, both lives are playing in time. And if I want to change the BPM, I go to this, and you can already hear that is both instances of live. Let me close this. Both instances of live responding accurately, tightly to this tempo change. That's definitely usable. Like, it's not sample accurate, eh? Don't get me wrong, but that is usable, man. I mean, anyone who's been trying to do this, this is the way to do it. Okay, and I'll do a better video and like more detailed explanation. If there's any questions and stuff, I'm more than happy to answer. But the other brilliant thing about this system, stop that again, is that particularly with something like this MIDI splitter, I could actually have, well, this particular one allows me to have up to 8 through, so I could theoretically sync 8 machines really nicely using this. And of course that doesn't preclude you using the other, you know, using the through on this to link other stuff. Obviously when you start chaining MIDI you introduce more latency, but it can all be compensated for in the preferences in here using the MIDI clock sync delay. Okay, right, so there's the answer to live set. You just need an external clock device like this, some MIDI cables and MIDI input on all of your devices. And to be honest, it's a bit of a stupid one because this is exactly how we used to do it before we had computers doing all our sequencing. And I guess my brain just went a bit rusty after all those years. Yeah, okay, enjoy, get amongst it.